At 3:48 in the morning, a Perdue Farms hatchery truck backs into the loading dock at a facility on the Delmarva Peninsula. The driver checks the manifest. 94 boxes. Each box holds 100-day-old chicks, 9,400 birds, hatched within the last 12 hours, already eating and vocalizing in the climate-controlled compartments stacked in the truck's interior. The compartment temperature holds at 86 degrees Fahrenheit. The route ahead will take 4 hours and cover 6 farms in 3 Maryland counties. By the time the last box empties at the last farm, those chicks will be one step into the 38 to 42-day grow-out cycle that converts a 1.8-ounce hatch-weight bird into a market broiler. This truck is one of dozens running this same pattern this same morning across the Delmarva Peninsula. The 170-mile-long stretch of land bordered by the Chesapeake Bay and the Delaware and Atlantic coasts that encompasses parts of Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia. Within that geography, Perdue Farms has built one of the most concentrated poultry production systems in the United States. 2,200 contract growers, 7 hatcheries producing 9.6 million chicks weekly, 13 feed mills, 10 processing plants, 676 million pounds of chicken annually. The Delmarva Peninsula's flat, sandy-soiled agricultural land and rural labor history didn't make Perdue's system inevitable. What made it possible was 8 decades of deliberate decisions. From Arthur Perdue's egg business in the 1920s through Frank Perdue's transformation of the company into a consumer brand in the 1970s, and the generations of grower relationships that built a contract farming network across a specific geography with specific characteristics that made dense poultry production economically and logistically sustainable. Understanding that system requires starting where it starts. At 3:48 in the morning, with a truck full of day-old chicks heading into the dark. The Delmarva Peninsula's broiler chicken industry began not with Perdue, but with a Sussex County, Delaware farmer named Cecile Steele, who in 1923 ordered 50-day-old chicks for egg production and received 500 by mistake. Rather than returning the excess, she raised all 500 for meat. They sold for 62 cents per pound. The following year, she ordered 1,000. By 1926, she was raising 25,000 birds annually, numbers that her neighbors noticed and replicated. The commercial broiler industry that spread from that origin in Sussex County across the Delmarva Peninsula operated in the 1930s and 1940s as a dispersed market of independent farmers selling to independent buyers. Arthur Perdue, operating a grain business in Salisbury, Maryland, saw the fragmentation. Farmers with no reliable market, the buyers with no reliable supply, and positioned his company as the integrating intermediary. Perdue moved into hatchery operations first, supplying chicks to independent growers who previously had to source their own, then feed, supplied on credit against the growers' future chicken sales, then a processing plant, giving growers a guaranteed buyer for finished birds. Each step extended Perdue's involvement further into the production chain, and each step added a service that gave growers a reason to align their production with Perdue's requirements. Frank Perdue, who took control of the company in 1952, pushed the integration further and added a dimension that no other poultry integrator had built at scale: a consumer-facing brand. The Perdue brand, with Frank Perdue's face on the package and a premium price point that the brand's marketing justified, changed the economics of the entire operation. The branded chicken that commanded a retail price premium over commodity chicken generated a margin that the Perdue system could distribute across the production chain, paying growers rates that reflected the premium the brand captured. The brand-building decision separated Perdue from the integrators that remained commodity producers and made the Delmarva Peninsula operation the reference point for what integrated poultry production with consumer brand investment could achieve. Perdue's 7 hatcheries, producing 9.6 million chicks weekly, are the industrial biological heart of the 676 million pound annual production system. The mathematics of 9.6 million chicks per week across 52 weeks yields approximately 499 million chicks placed annually. Not all of them survive to market weight. Early mortality, condemnations at processing, and performance variation account for the difference between placements and the 676 million pound annual output. But the hatchery network must produce at that rate continuously, week after week, to sustain the 2,200 grower farms that together hold the bird inventory the processing plants require. Each hatchery draws on breeder flocks, Perdue-owned flocks of parent-generation broiler birds that produce the fertile eggs from which commercial chicks hatch. Breeder flocks on company-owned farms follow their own production calendar. Hens lay fertile eggs from approximately 25 weeks of age through 60 to 65 weeks, after which production and hatch quality decline to the point where flock replacement is economical. Managing the breeder flock replacement cycle across enough farms to maintain 9.6 million chicks weekly requires planning that runs 18 to 24 months ahead of any given week's hatch. The fertile eggs move from breeder farms to hatcheries within 24 to 48 hours of laying. The hatcheries incubate them for 21 days, 18 days in setter incubators at 99.5 degrees Fahrenheit, then 3 days in hatchers at slightly lower temperature. Before the hatch day produces the chicks that load onto the delivery trucks. Post-hatch processing at Perdue's hatcheries includes vaccination, spray or eye drop application of vaccines against Marek's disease, Newcastle disease, and infectious bronchitis that provides the flock-level immunity the company's health protocols require. The vaccination step happens on the hatchery floor before the chicks box. A missed or inadequate vaccination at this point creates a health vulnerability that can manifest as disease challenge at the contract grower's farm 6 weeks later, with no practical way to correct the deficiency once the chick has left the hatchery. The 2,200 contract growers on Perdue's Delmarva network represent a specific agricultural form that the peninsula's geography enabled and the contract integration model created. A typical Perdue grower operates 2 to 6 growing houses, each 40 to 60 feet wide and 400 to 600 feet long, sized to hold between 22,000 and 35,000 broiler chicks from placement through the 38 to 42-day grow-out. The investment in those houses, construction, ventilation equipment, your automated feeding and watering systems, litter management infrastructure, runs between $300,000 and $600,000 per house, depending on size and specifications. A 4-house grower operation represents $1.2 million to $2.4 million in facility investment. Perdue provides the chicks, the feed, the veterinary services, and the guaranteed market for finished birds. The grower provides the facilities, the land, the utilities, and the labor. Primarily the grower's own labor, managed around the flock schedule rather than a conventional work calendar. Flock placement is a demanding 48-hour period. The subsequent grow-out involves daily monitoring and adjustment. Catching weak when the live haul crews arrive to load finished birds for the processing plant, is another intensive period. The service technician who visits the grower's farm weekly is the primary operational connection between Perdue's centralized protocols and the individual grower's daily management decisions. Each technician carries a territory of 25 to 40 farms, monitoring performance data between visits and responding to issues the grower calls in between scheduled visits. The technician does not own the birds or control the feed formula. What the technician provides is the translation of Perdue's production standards into practical guidance for each farm's specific housing, equipment, and management history. The Delmarva Peninsula's geographic concentration, 2,200 farms within a 170-mile-long region, gives Perdue's logistics network a density advantage that reduces feed delivery distances, live haul transportation time, and service technician territory sizes compared to what a geographically dispersed system with the same farm count would require. A feed truck serving Delmarva Farms rarely drives more than 50 miles from a mill to reach its most distant stop. A live haul truck carrying finished birds to a Perdue processing plant rarely exceeds 60 miles of transit. The 13 feed mills that supply Perdue's Delmarva growers operate within the geographic concentration that makes the logistics manageable. A broiler's feed requirement, over a 40-day grow-out, at 2 pounds of gain per pound of feed, converts to approximately 9 to 10 pounds of feed per bird, at a market weight around 5 to 6 pounds. At 9.6 million chicks placed weekly, the weekly feed demand across the active growing population at any given time, accounting for the staggered age distribution of flocks across all 2,200 farms, runs to several 100,000 tons per week across the full network. The 13 mills manage this supply through dedicated routes, computerized delivery scheduling, and the ration sequencing that Perdue's nutritional team specifies for each phase of the grow-out. Starter rations for day-old through 10-day-old chicks carry the highest protein levels, typically 22 to 24% crude protein, and the smallest particle size that newly hatched chicks can consume. As the flock ages through grower and finisher ration phases, the protein levels decrease and particle size increases to match the bird's growing nutritional requirements and physical capacity. The withdrawal feed, the final ration fed in the last days before harvest, contains no antibiotic growth, promoters or other feed additives that carry pre-slaughter withdrawal periods. Managing the withdrawal feed delivery requires that the correct ration arrives at the farm on the schedule the live haul date requires. A farm that receives the wrong ration, a grower ration with growth promoters instead of the withdrawal feed, must be identified and corrected before the birds reach the minimum withdrawal period. At 2,200 farms with staggered flock ages and 13 mills serving geographically distributed routes, the precision of delivery scheduling and ration tracking is an operational requirement that Perdue's computerized mill and delivery management systems address continuously. The 10 processing plants that harvest and process Perdue's 676 million pounds annually are the endpoint of the grow-out pipeline and the beginning of the distribution chain that connects the Delmarva production system to retail and food service customers across the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. A Perdue processing plant running at rated capacity processes between 1 million and 1.5 million birds per week, depending on the facility's configuration and shift structure. At 9.6 million chicks placed weekly across the network, the 10 plants together must process roughly that volume of finished birds on a staggered schedule that matches plant capacity to the wave of flocks completing their grow-out. The live haul operation that moves finished birds from contract grower farms to plant receiving begins at night. Darkness calms broilers. They are less active, easier to handle, and less prone to the pile-on behavior that causes suffocation deaths during catching in bright conditions. Catching crews move through the darkened grow-out house, picking birds from the litter floor and loading them into transport modules stacked on flatbed vehicles or container trucks. The physical demands of the work, repetitive lifting of 5 to 6 pound birds across hours of catching, generate the injury rates that make live haul among the most physically demanding jobs in the poultry production chain. Transport vehicle design attempts to balance bird density against ventilation. Birds packed too tightly overheat and die in transit. Birds with excessive space shift during transport, injuring each other. The stocking density specifications Perdue applies to its transport modules are calibrated to the vehicle type, the season, and the expected transit duration, which rarely exceeds 60 miles on the Delmarva network. USDA FSIS inspectors assigned to each plant conduct ante-mortem inspection of incoming birds at the receiving pens before the kill floor begins, then maintain continuous presence through both harvest and processing shifts. The inspection presence at 10 plants simultaneously requires a FSIS assignment that tracks the processing schedule each plant operates. The automated evisceration, cut-up, and further processing lines inside Perdue's plants reflect 6 decades of continuous investment in the mechanical systems that reduce per-bird labor cost while improving consistency in the finished product. Modern broiler evisceration equipment runs birds through a sequence of automated stations: neck skin removal, at vent opening, abdominal incision, viscera withdrawal, and lung removal, at line speeds measured in birds per minute. A line running 140 birds per minute processes 8,400 per hour, or roughly 67,000 in an 8-hour shift. 2 shifts per day at that speed approaches 135,000 birds, without the maintenance downtime and scheduled break periods that reduce actual throughput below theoretical maximums. USDA inspectors positioned at specific line stations conduct carcass inspection at each bird. Have the inspection observations, disease conditions, contamination, physical defects determine whether each carcass passes into the production stream, requires trimming before passing, or receives condemnation and diversion away from human food use. The inspection integration at these line speeds requires that the inspector can observe and make a determination on each carcass within the time the line speed allows, typically 2 to 3 seconds per bird at current authorized speeds. The cut-up and deboning lines that follow the initial harvest produce the bone-in pieces, boneless portions, and further processed products that Perdue's retail and food service customers specify. The product mix that a Perdue plant produces on any given day reflects the demand signals from its customer base. Retail buyers who need specific pack weights of breast fillets, food service customers who need specific portion-controlled pieces for restaurant preparation, and export buyers who take dark meat portions that the domestic market doesn't fully absorb. Perdue's further processing operations, the marinated products, the breaded items, the ready-to-cook and ready-to-eat preparations that carry the Perdue brand at retail. Add value beyond commodity chicken by converting undifferentiated muscle into branded convenience products. The brand premium that Frank Perdue built in the 1970s expresses itself most fully in these further processed products, where the Perdue name on the package justifies a price point above the commodity market. The cold chain distribution network that moves Perdue's finished products from processing plants to retail and food service destinations represents the final logistical stage of the system that began with a 3:48 a.m. chick delivery in March. Perdue's geographic concentration on the Delmarva Peninsula positions its processing plants within practical overnight distribution range of the largest consumer markets on the East Coast. The Boston to Washington corridor, the most densely populated stretch of the United States, sits within 200 miles of Perdue's Delmarva processing complex. A refrigerated truck departing a Perdue plant in the evening reaches a distribution center serving Boston, New York, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, or Richmond by morning. This geographic advantage, proximity to the largest consumer markets in the country, is a structural asset of the Delmarva location that no inland production geography can replicate. A broiler company producing in Arkansas or Alabama can ship product to the East Coast, but it does so at a transportation cost and transit time disadvantage relative to Perdue's Delmarva position. The peninsula's location made it the preferred geography for poultry integration in the Mid-Atlantic region, and Perdue's 7 decades of network building there created a density and logistics efficiency that compounds the locational advantage. 676 million pounds annually. The number represents a specific place. The Delmarva Peninsula, 170 miles long, bounded by water on 3 sides, and a specific organizational model: company-owned genetics, company-owned hatcheries, the company-owned feed mills, company-owned processing plants, and 2,200 independent farm families providing the housing and labor that convert 9.6 million weekly chicks into finished broilers. The model that Arthur Perdue began assembling in the 1940s and Frank Perdue scaled with brand investment in the 1970s has been replicated across the American South by Tyson, Pilgrims, Coke, Mountaire, and dozens of smaller integrators. But the Delmarva Peninsula version of the model carries characteristics that the replications elsewhere don't fully duplicate. The geographic concentration that gives the logistics network its density advantage, the consumer brand recognition that supports the price premium, and the 8 decades of grower relationships that represent the accumulated trust and operating history of a specific community built around a specific agricultural enterprise. At 3:48 in the morning, there's the delivery truck clears the hatchery dock. By 8 a.m., the last box empties at the last farm. 9,400 birds on the first day of 38 to 42. 42 days later, they leave the same peninsula they arrived on, processed and packaged and cold, moving north toward the markets that the geography of Delmarva was built to serve. The chick delivery truck is already back at the hatchery, loading the next route. If this look at the infrastructure, logistics, and history behind 676 million pounds of chicken produced annually on the Delmarva Peninsula gave you a clearer picture of how the American broiler industry actually functions, hit the like button and help the algorithm surface this content for more viewers. Subscribe for more deep dives into the production systems and supply chains that sit behind everyday food. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. The range of locations in these threads continues to grow, and hearing from them matters every time.